A very good morning to you guys. Welcome to Asake Online. This is the Breakfast Club. My name is Brighton Ncube. You know, we're in the 16 days of activism against abuse of women and young girls. So today on the show, we're going to talk about that and more, to hear from the church side in terms of what can be done going forward to curb the issue of gender-based violence on young women and girls, in particular also men. So joining me today is Rev.Useni Sibanda from Zimbabwe Christian Alliance. He's the director there, and also the SG from UDACIZA, that's Reverend Chitanda. Good morning. Welcome to the show this morning.
Well, thank you so much. I'm glad that you have us here this morning.
Last week, Rev, we did the 16 Days of Activism launch campaign. Talk to us about that campaign.
Well, the campaign was targeting two major issues. First of all, we recognize that 40% of our women are actually affected by gender-based violence. And our analysis is that if it's 40% of the women and about 86% of our population goes to church, either on Saturday or on Sunday. So that 40% surely must be within our churches. And also we know that there have been issues around churches not being safe spaces. So our campaign is to turn that around. We want churches to become safe spaces for women and girls, and that the church itself takes lead in terms of the campaign against gender-based violence. And so the whole campaign last week, we did a march that is in Kulumane, Bulawayo townships. So it was from one of the shopping complexes to one of the churches. So it was quite symbolic that we bring the community to the church. And then the launch itself, we allowed people to speak out about it. This is in partnership with UDACIZA, and I'm sure the General Secretary is going to explain as well. And so these are apostolic and Zionist churches. But this was also an ecumenical campaign. So it brought in mainline churches, Pentecostal churches, charismatic churches, independent churches. And the whole idea is we're saying to the church leaders and the pastors, the church must be a safe space. And then secondly, from the pulpit itself, we must lead in the campaign of encouraging people to speak out if there's gender-based violence, but also to prevent it. And we also spoke about referral places, where people can go to. Zimbabwe Republic Police, we had Ministry of Women's Affairs that came to speak out and gave us options if someone is in a challenge, and as well as we had the Minister of State for Bulawayo Metropolitan who officially launched this. We also had a candle lighting ceremony, which was symbolic, how the church wants to walk and be in solidarity with survivors of gender-based violence.
Yeah. Just bring Reverend Chitanda on the conversation again. Yeah. Talk to us about UDACIZA. What is UDACIZA and their role they're playing there?
UDACIZA, it means Union for the Development of Apostolic and Zionist Churches in Zimbabwe and Africa. As UDACIZA, we are an umbrella board which represents the Apostolic and Zionist churches throughout the country. We have got about 17 board of members, which consist of 7 at high level and then 10 from each province. So as UDACIZA, in this meeting, we're represented by our board member, Bishop Sham, who is a provincial chairperson, and is also the board member of UDACIZA.
Also speaking about the issue of I remember I was following the campaign online, we launched the campaign. Bishop Sham spoke highly about the issue of malpractices happening in the apostolic as well as the Zion sector. Talk to us about those malpractices, Bishop.
I think Bishop Sham was rising on the research which was done by UDACIZA in 2013-2016, which we invited bishops and leaders from all regions. And then we asked them several questions on what can we do as a church to make sure that the apostolic churches will also be a safe space. If we speak of safe spaces, which means at leadership level, the people must be able to trust our leaders in whatever they want from our leaders. So in this book, the leaders spell out what they think must be done. I think Bishop Sham mentioned the issue of harmful cultural practice, early child marriages, and the issue of health, why women are not being referred early to hospital. As UDACIZA, this is one of the challenges which we are trying to work out to make sure that our church become a safe place. We heard earlier of issue of that girl, Anna Machaya, who died in Marange. I think the newspaper, they make headline, but there was no solution. So as UDACIZA, we want solutions. How can we deal? How can we prevent future death from our members?
Rev, there's been this issue of men saying, when we do the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence for women and young girls, we forget and neglect men in it. In cultural and daily culture, they say UDACIZA and so on. What can you say to men who are going through something and they're afraid of speaking out because of, I'm a man, so I'm the breadwinner, they can't speak out?
Yeah, there are a lot of men also who are facing gender-based violence. I guess we need to work on the statistics. But as you know, culturally, UDACIZA, so men go under a lot of abuse at home, and some of it can be physical. The fact that now a lot of men are out of work, unemployment, and day in, day out, it gets verbally abused. And in some cases, there are violent cases that occur. It's difficult for a man to go to the police station. The other time, we were counseling one man, and he said to me, well, if I go to the police and tell the police that my wife beat me up, they will laugh at me. So that on its own, the man is afraid to go to thing. And also, we have challenges of challenges that men face at a later age. And sometimes if the man is not performing as expected within the matrimonial bed, that also becomes an issue of abuse and psychological abuse on the man. And he takes that in. And so we have men suffering all these things, and they need to talk to someone. We have cases of suicide now. You remember with COVID-19, we had so many cases of suicide, and a lot of pressure is brought to bear on the men, you know, to economically provide for the family, but also the wife might say to him, well, you are not performing like, you know, like I expect you. And to a man, that's a very big issue. So these are things that could be, where men could be assisted, actually. Could be talked to someone, counseled and assisted, but because they're afraid to talk about it, they then become victims, and so much psychological pressure. During COVID, we trained a lot of pastors, both men and women, so that they can provide hotlines and can be available to talk to anyone who is in such pressure. So I think it's a very, very important thing we need to talk about. Yes, men also are facing the same challenge.
Rev. Chitanda, let's speak about the issue of safe spaces. I know you spoke about that. You've been saying safe spaces for many times in this conversation. But how safe are these safe spaces? I know people watching the show can say, but I can tell my pastor, but will they keep this for themselves or they can go and open up for someone else? Let's speak about safe spaces. Is the church a safe space for anyone to come and confide the information with you guys?
Thank you. I think this one is a very difficult question, but I think, first of all, we, as a church, that's why we are working as ecumenical, that's why I combine with Zimbabwe Christian Alliance, Zimbabwe Council of Churches, EFZ. I think as a church, we need to support each other. There's a need for a church to become mature. We must have got a clear regulatory framework. So like most of the councillors, if I'm a councillor, you know that if you make a mistake, you are going to be punished. But here in Zimbabwe, I think as a church, you've got a gap, which most of the church leaders, they are escaping with a lot of damage without any punishment. So I think we as mother bodies, we must develop a regulatory framework which will make sure that anyone who commit or who did something which is not in line with what we believe, we must punish them. I think we must develop a strategy. I must not air it out now, but we need to do a further investigation. How can we make sure that our role as pastors is well respected in the community? Just because most of people, they are committing a lot of wrong things in the name of these pastors, in the name of these bishops. So if we have got a clear regulatory framework, we'll be able to control these people.
Yeah, and also, I mean, like what he's saying, for instance, when we're speaking with the Bishop Shamu and him, the GS, looking at the UDACIZA's own research work that they've done and sort of outcomes and thoughts around it, you can see that there is a level where even at different church, umbrella church bodies, where people are saying, let's have pastoral or ministerial conducts, you know, and also a way of, you know, bringing in stray people. I think one of the trainings that any pastor receives or any counselor receives is that, well, if someone confides in you, you know, it's for you and that person. You can't then go and preach about it or use it as an example, because you are going to damage that person who has confided in you. I mean, the first thing is when people come for counseling, it's really about trust. So I think it's trust at 2 levels. Trust that you keep the information confidential, but also trusting you. That if I can come and talk to you, I'm also safe with you, the person I'm telling my issues around. Because you know, some of the people end up saying, okay, if you don't have fertility, if you cannot have children, I have a way to solve it. Let's go, the 2 of us, to the bush, and I help you have children, and so forth. So women, because they are desperate, they get deceived. And so this is one of the things, how do we protect them from preying, from people who prey on women like that? And also, some of these cases are outright, well, they're criminal, really. And I think it's lack of knowledge for some people to know that, well, look, if someone does this to me, they've gone overboard, they've crossed the line. So I need to report it, the sexual abuse, and so forth. So I think all those things, awareness is very important, so that people who come to church don't get deceived. I mean, I saw this case of women, of this man who said he was praying for them, and he's holding, you know, a breast and stuff like that, and he's going over areas where he shouldn't go in the name of praying for that person. So those people could immediately go and report. And I mean, on top of that, it's being recorded on video. So, you know, you just say, okay, this is really huge abuse. So I think we need to tighten, as churches, with those laws. We need to tighten our regulations. We need to tighten, I think, parameters where people could go, but also awareness for women and girls to know that if someone does this to me, they've really gone beyond the line, and this is now criminal.
Yeah. Speaking of awareness, let's speak about the issue we spoke about earlier, to say if I go and report to the police, they will laugh at you as a man, right? Let's speak of the systems, even societal systems. How do we change this narrative to say, no, gender-based violence? People have normalized this thing. How do we change that narrative of people normalize gender-based violence?
I think it comes to issue of we are a patriarchal society. So as a church, we must find out in the Bible what the Bible says. Yeah. If you have become a true Christian, you must live like Jesus Christ. If you read the Bible, is it Deuteronomy 22, verse 15? He said that if you rape, you deserve to be hanged. But unfortunately, in this modern world, we do not emphasize on the issue of but we must deal with that person who had committed abuse. We must make sure that as a church, we've got systems which prevent the vulnerable groups. For example, we as UDACIZA, we have got one center which regulates the constitutions of all these churches. We make sure that each member, when he comes with his or her constitution to our mother body, we must make sure that they've got the clause which prevent this gender-based violence. We make sure that our mechanism in the province, they are ready to report to several stakeholders in that meeting. So as UDACIZA, we are making sure that we have got a clear referral system so that as a church, there are some issues which we are not able to deal with. There are some acts in the country which can solve these things. So as a church, if you are well capacitated, our members must be ready to refer those to the people who are capable to deal with it. For example, I'm a pastor. I will not be a trained counselor. I must work with these skilled people who can deal with those issues. So as a church, we are not working in isolation. As a system, in order to function, all systems must be functional. So as a church, we must be willing to learn with people who share the same views with us to make sure that our community is well protected.
Yeah, well, also, I think that there is, like what he's saying, the issue of safeguarding. There is the issue of looking at our doctrine. So if you look at it, it's very clear. The Bible says both men and women were created in the image of God. So they're all created equal. What is different between men and women are roles. They have different roles that they play, that society assigns to them. But when God looks at us, he looks at us as all equal. So there's no one who's supposed to dominate or violate another person. Then the second issue is that I think the default mode that we have is if there is conflict, the default mode is to resort to violence. So you see that plays out everywhere. It's parents, when your child misbehaves, the next thing you're picking up a stick and beating that child. You don't sit down to reason with them to say, okay, listen, why did you do this? Yes, of course, there is a place for discipline, but it should not be, it should be discipline out of love for children. But then we end up violating even those children. We are beating them. It's no longer beating. Like I saw a story of a teacher who beat this girl with a ruler, and you're injuring someone. So it's no longer discipline or correction. It's now violence. So it's the same with within marriages. Yes, there are disagreements. People would not be like live in paradise. There will be disputes. There will be misunderstandings. So instead of the default should be dialogue. Let's talk about it. If we fail to talk about it, like what the pastor is saying, maybe you need a trained counselor to help you. But the default mode now is violence. So someone resorts to this, the next thing, if we cannot agree with each other, I have to pick up a knob carry and beat you up. There's a cultural element, but even within our culture, we know that would refer issues to our auntie, would say, this one is difficult for us to solve. Asambeni kubani, kumalume. And we go and talk about it. So our cultural system as Africans was not always that if there is a conflict, pick up a knob carry, then beat your wife. No, there was dialogue, and your wife could move and say, okay, I will now go to your aunt and tell you. And then the aunt comes back with you, and there's dialogue. So there was our own indigenous system of dialogue, which we have left out. But even as churches, as faith movements, we are saying, let's not resort to violence. Let's talk about it. And also, men sometimes assume that even if a woman says no, it means she says yes. So her no is her no, is not a yes. And we've been taught sometimes to say, no, but she's agreeing even if she's saying no, which is wrong. So we also want to work with men and make them to be aware, and our boys to grow up knowing that you must respect the opinion of the woman. You must respect this woman. You must, maintain. Don't treat her like a lesser being, and that's very, very important. And I think the pulpit is an important place where these campaigns must come from, because we are influencing the thinking of the nation and the mindset of our nation.
Guys, if you're just joining us, this is the Breakfast Club. This is ASAKE Online. This program is proudly brought to you by Zimbabwe Alliance in partnership with UDACIZA. Today on the show, I'm joined by Reverend Chitanda, the SG of UDACIZA and the Director of Zimbabwe Alliance. Let's talk about the issue of the pulpit now. Let's come to you on the issue of how are you raising awareness in terms of the apostolic churches, these your apostle churches, how are you raising awareness of gender-based violence?
I think as UDACIZA, in most districts which we are operating, we are training churches the role of the church in GBV. What verses should they read? For example, we've got 2 Samuel 13 verse, the story of Tamar, who was raped by his half-brother. As UDACIZA, if we go through this Tamar campaign, we can explain that. You can see some people there, they were just watching, they do not react. The father David and Absalom, they did nothing when Tamar was raped. But in the end, there was a violence which was done in that family. David did not react, but this caused a split into his family. So we as a church, if we do not participate, if we do not eliminate perpetrators, if we do not deal with abusers, we are participating indirectly. The consequence of not participating will haunt us into the future. So you see that in the country there is a lot of unnecessary violence. If we go deeper, you can see that there are so many unresolved issues like this abuse. So as a country, if we do not react to those situations, we are in future we will suffer. Coming back to the issue of culture, I think in Shona, whatever you've got a challenge, each community have got a council of elders which sit down, and if you have got difference, God will give them wisdom to deal with whatever challenge we have in the community. So if our old fathers and old fathers were able to deal with that issue, why us as this generation are we not able to do this issue? We must go back to the drawing board, back to the drawing board, and make sure as a nation we are able to deal with this issue.
But Rev, there are other Christians who are in the church, right? But they're still deep into culture. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to be in culture, but they're still deep into culture, believe in patriarch and so on. How do we then remove that mentality of saying, no, as I'm the man, I'm supposed to do A, B, C, and D, and how do you remove that barrier through the pulpit?
Yeah, well, I think that's why we need to explain our understanding of origins of humanity. And also, if you look at how it blends with Ubuntu bethu, and like what the GS was saying, we have our own cultural spaces where we are already respecting each other. We knew the roles of the women, the roles of men, but with also understanding now of how God created both of these people equal. We need to begin to change that mindset. I think it's a journey. We have to be honest, it's a journey. It's not going to be overnight, but I think we need to begin to change that mindset. I think we also need to think of the next generation. For our young people, we need to change the way they think now so that this GBV thing is ingrained in our society. And I think if we work on the next generation, there will be a change. But on this current generation, I think we need to continue like what he's saying. Let's use biblical text. Let's look at our cultural practices, how to improve them, how to strengthen what is already there. There are many groups now that have been dealing with men's fellowships, where we bring men together and say, let's talk. As men, let's have a dialogue. I know that there's an occasion called Enkundleni Badare, which has really been a men's forum where people are talking. But that men's forum, we're bringing it into the churches. So a lot of church and men's fellowships are beginning to say, okay, let's rethink. And in this particular 16 days, because we are talking to pastors to use biblical text on pulpits to speak about this, we are praying and hoping that a lot of them will filter this even into the men's fellowships where people are beginning to discuss. I know, for instance, for a church that's going to have a men's fellowship where they bring in even someone who's dealing with psychosocial thinking around that, and they are bringing churches together where men are sitting around the table and say, let's talk about mental health, let's talk about pressures that we have as men. And I think that slowly begins to transform and change the way in which people are thinking.
Rev, as we wrap up the show this morning, what can you say to other reverends who are watching the show, who are part of the apostolic churches, the Zion and so on, in terms of coming together, helping each other to curb gender-based violence?
I think as apostolic and Zion churches, we must redeem the pride of the church. Every time there is a mention of gender-based violence, our members are sometimes found wanting. So as UDACIZA, we encourage our members to deal with this issue. We must ask ourselves as a Christian, what is the role of the Christian? What did the Bible say about gender-based violence? How can we deal with this issue at an early stage, before it had disrupted the whole system of the church, before the violence had affected each and every part into the church? So if we deal with this issue, the earlier, the better, so that as apostolic and Zion churches, we bring the reputation of our church to the country.
Rev, in closing, what can you expect from this campaign from Zimbabwe Christian Alliance and UDACIZA? What can you expect this week as we enter 16 days of activism?
Yeah, well, first of all, we're hoping that this becomes not just 16 days only, but that we can carry this forward. And we are saying from every pulpit, from every platform that we can, we want to say no to gender-based violence, and that the church must be the safe space for women and girls. And we are saying we want to change the concepts, like what our General Secretary is saying, that the church is where people are now getting abused. But we want to change that and say no. And also, if someone gets abused, we are saying, please go and make a report to the police. And also find help. Find help. Hopefully the nearest church is safe. Find help in the nearest church. Let's go to the police. Let's go to women's affairs. Let's go to created safe spaces. And we have people like Msasa Project. All those places are referral places where you can go to and get assistance and help.
But before we close, I'm tempted to ask around the issue of GBV policies. I know I've been talking about GBV, but the policies then, do we have policies which are in line with these things to be able to deal with the GBV? Rev? I
think as UDACIZA have got our own policy, which we say that we did the research, and the bishops recommended what they want. So I think as UDACIZA have got clear policy. And come back to what the Rev.Useni had said, I think as UDACIZA, we emphasize on the issue of collaboration with the like-minded. you can see one of the best team which was loved by everyone in this Zimbabwe, the Dream Team, which consists of Peter of Argent, Ajira Sau. Everyone, even they did not go further, everyone was willing to watch this team just because they were magnificent. So as UDACIZA, we encourage collaboration with the like-minded. We encourage teamwork as UDACIZA. So the people like Zimbabwe Christian Alliance and other partners, we are willing to collaborate for the common cause to save the vulnerable groups in the community.
Yeah, and also, I think one of the unique things about this campaign has also been the social responsibility of finance companies. For instance, we had Old Mutual, CAPS, that came in to support us, which was quite unique, but they're also saying, look, we don't want to see gender-based violence. And so it's not just about corporates, not just out there to make money, but they are saying, let's take responsibility. So Old Mutual really led in that, and also we had support from the Canadian Embassy, where they were also saying, let's support this. And so for me, it began to ring that maybe corporates in Zimbabwe are beginning to also want to look at this as part of their responsibility. And so the campaign is not just within churches, but I think corporates all over are beginning to say, look, let's do something about this. And this is so encouraging, I think.
Today I feel blessed to be part of the Men of the Cloth, to be here. I feel blessed. Thank you so much, guys, for joining me this morning on the Breakfast Club. Reverend Sibanda and Reverend Chitanda there from UDACIZA. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Okay,
thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Well, there you have it. This has been the Breakfast Club, man. Talking about gender-based violence, the church, the role of the church, and what can be done to solve gender-based violence. I hope you guys enjoy the show, and hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day. To follow site on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, as well as on platforms, across social media platforms. My name is Brighton Ncube. It's bye for now.